Hail fellows. Hello, welcome to English at Leeds Trinity, a podcast for students and staff at Leeds Trinity University to share their interests in everything to do with English, studying English, using English, history of English, and other languages as well. I'm Richard Storer. I'm a lecturer in English at Leeds Trinity, and I'm very pleased that I am joined by Hannah.
Hello.
And Ben.
Good morrow.
And I'm also very pleased that we are joined by Dr. Will Standing, who works at both Leeds Trinity and University of Leeds and is involved in lots of different things to do with higher education and linguistics, and particularly what we're interested in today, historical linguistics. So welcome, Will.
Wesathole.
Thank you. And so hopefully everybody picked up there that we were actually using greetings that represent the history of English from what Will said, which is Old English, what Ben said, which is kind of Middle English. Or was it me who said that one?
It's your Middle English.
I was Middle English.
Early modern English.
Early modern English. And Hannah and I also said hello, and we've just established that is really a greeting that started in the sort of 19th century. Doesn't go back that far, though it's now so influential. So
practically newfangled.
It's newfangled compared to the others. What yours was Wesathole.
Wesathole.
Which means?
It means I wish you health, wishing health.
Wishing health, right.
Which I suppose is probably ultimately the derivation of hail as well. Hail and hearty, hail and healthy, I suppose would be like a related term. Okay,
well, historical linguistics is going to be our focus. And if I can just attempt, and then I'm going to ask Will to sort of add to my definition, I think. By historical linguistics, I think really we mean studying how languages are different at one point in time from what they were in an earlier point of time. So it includes looking at what they used to be like, looking at what they're like now, looking at maybe how they are changing even as we speak. Well, especially as we speak, that's how they change. And kind of how that happens and how to prove that it's happened.
I'd say that's pretty accurate. You could also call what you just defined diachronic linguistics. So,
right,
as opposed to synchronic linguistics. Synchronic linguistics looks at the nature of the language as it's spoken now, spoken by different communities now, whereas diachronic linguistics looks at how languages change over time by doing exactly as you say, looking at present day language use, looking at past language use, and trying to connect the dots, reverse engineer it a little bit.
What we're going to go on to do is Will is going to share with us some of the kinds of research and data gathering that he has done as part of his research, and that we can even have a go at. But I thought before we did that, we could each perhaps say a little bit about what we find interesting in the whole field of historical linguistics. What has interested us about finding out more about the difference between English as we use it now and English as it used to be used. So I thought I might start. One of the topics that I find interesting, fascinating, is the great vowel shift, because that seems to me a great kind of monument really to the work of historical linguists in the 19th century, that without having access to any records of people speaking, no kind of audio database to work on, but through looking at things like spellings and regional variation and how other Germanic languages have developed and so on, they were able to reconstruct how a number of long vowels in English changed their sound, or changed in some parts of the country. And so much work went into that to produce those results. I just find it fascinating where, if that is a huge historical linguistic project, which I guess started with people saying, I don't understand why Chaucer seems to think that's supposed to rhyme and it doesn't rhyme. Maybe he's pronounced the words differently back then, but then just kind of working it out. I find that amazing that they managed to do that. So that's about speech, but it actually depends on writing to do the kind of reconstruction there. So that, I guess, is the reason why I say house, but there are some people who would say hoose.
Yeah. And I find it quite, I find it very fascinating that the way into that quite complicated story of how sounds change in English, the way into it is rhyme. Like that was the first point that maybe you'd notice it when you're performing Chaucer or something like that. And yeah, you realize he's making really weird rhymes here. Either he's like experimental or this was just different. Yeah, or he's just really bad, which he wasn't. He was a brilliant writer. The connection of that to placement of sounds and things like that is just the beginning of a story that it has founded historical linguistics as a discipline. So yeah, no, I definitely agree. Very Fellowship's interesting.
We'll go on. Hannah, was there something that you wanted to share, that something you found interesting about the history of English?
Yeah, I think in general terms, I like looking at how sentence structure and word order kind of changed over time, and looking at these little changes, whether it's like syntax or morphology, kind of looking at how in English is like the best thing, how it's evolved so far and how it might change over time. If you consider how it might change over time, you'll kind of need to look back at how it's changed so far and what kind of languages influenced it and things like that. And I think that the small changes like the word order and things like that, I think they're the most interesting aspect.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's something that we'll probably pick up later, that we sometimes think of history of English as just the history of individual words. But in a way, there's much more to discover about the way we put words together and the way we change words in order to indicate what they're doing. That's the morphology side of it, isn't it? So,
yeah. And the massive change in English from a kind of case-led system to a word order-led system is probably one of the most interesting things that has happened in a Germanic language. This breakdown of an old order.
That's kind of a bigger change, really, isn't it? That loss of case endings. That's a bigger change that we could really expect to happen any time in the future.
Well, the thing about that, I suppose, is that the syntactic change, the change in whether cases are useful in a language, happens quite far down the line. The first changes are phonological. The reason that we lost cases and the reason that we could gain cases again is that the endings of words started to be pronounced more and more similarly, to the point where they weren't distinctive.
Yes.
And people had to find some other way of deciding what the subject was or what the object was, whatever. So it starts in just human speech and human economy, economical speech, laziness, and then ends in this kind of massive restructuring of the language system.
Right. Well, thank you. And Ben?
Yeah, I'm going to probably sort of deviate a little bit away from English specifically and talk more about the historical aspects. But one of my things that I take a lot of interest in is sort of the tattoo history of names, places, things like that. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, and it sounds really self-obsessed, but my surname Smith, which I have done quite a lot of research into, with it obviously being my ancestry roots and stuff like that, that it apparently comes from an old Norse Scandinavian word, which means to smite or to
all right,
hence blacksmith, watchsmith, goldsmith, stuff like that.
It's to do with hitting the anvil.
That or making, it also translates to. But yeah, it comes from its Germanic roots in Schmidt as well, and that was apparently because there was a colony or a group of people who came down from Scandinavia through the Rhineland and then eventually moved up into England, and hence now it's one of the most common surnames, English surnames that we have. But one thing I do find really interesting, especially in its Scandinavian roots, is they tell a story, do a lot of the meanings of the letters. So it's in Elder Furthark, which am I pronouncing that right, Will?
Futhark.
Futhark, that's it. That's really bad that I don't know how to correctly pronounce it.
It's always the way with these words that you always see written down.
Yeah.
And you never actually have to say.
Yeah, it's got quite a confusing and rich past, but it's where like you get runes from and things like that, and the straight lines, jagged edges.
So we're talking about the old writing system of Norse languages, or North Germanic languages,
and English.
English.
Futhaq, it was used for English quite extensively.
Yeah.
Well, as extensively as an early writing system could be. They didn't like writing then.
Yeah.
Or chisel and stonework, I guess. But so they've got like the stories that they tell, and I'm sure we'll tell you a little bit about if he's comfortable to his tattoo. But mine tells a story of people living on Earth and making weapons to wage war, which sounds really bad. The S means sun, the M means man, the I means ice or Isa, the T means Tyr, which means victory or the god of war, and H means Halagaz, which is destruction.
So you've got all that in a tattoo?
Yes, yeah. Which it kind of just looks like my name, but after doing research into it, it actually tells a story.
So your engagement with historical linguistics is actually kind of inscribed on your arm or somewhere?
On my leg, yeah.
Oh, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Yeah, so that's a real kind of, you're carrying it around with you all the time.
I too have some letters inscribed on me.
What's yours?
So I have got a band around one of my arms with, again, some Futhaq on it. Again, the Elder Futhaq. And it's actually an inscription that was found on a drinking horn, a golden drinking horn called the Galahus horn. It was found in southern Denmark, I think in the 90s. And it's, well, at the time, it was one of the earliest runic inscriptions that we had evidence of. And it doesn't say anything all that exciting. It says, Ek Lewagastes Holtejas Horna Tawido, which means I, Lewagastes Holtejas, made this horn. Which is what the content of much of the early inscription is, just name inscriptions or votive inscriptions for things that were probably gifts. But it's also an interesting one because I kind of implied it before, but at the time, the peoples who used this alphabet weren't all that keen on writing. There's some evidence that there was a taboo against writing, that it was seen as maybe something strange, maybe something foreign, maybe something slightly magical.
Right, I was going to say magic.
And so by putting someone's name on something, you imbued it with something about them, or you gave them power over it. And so I kind of liked that idea, and also I used these runes as part of my master's thesis. So this was kind of a memoriam for that stage in my education and training. And then I do have a couple of others. I've got one more, which is in Ogham, which is the pre-Christian Irish writing system. It's a piece of 9th century marginalia, so a little thing written in the margins by some monk before the first millennium AD. And they often wrote these things because most of the Latinate scholars couldn't read Ogham. And it just says Lathert, which means the ale has killed us. So I kind of liked the idea of a bit of a shared experience across time, that a 9th century monk had the same feeling as I do sometimes after a heavy night.
The monk said that, right?
Yeah. A monk was like, the ale has killed me. I've been drinking too much. I can't copy this Bible anymore. And that's those things that Ben talked about, and I'm talking quite generally here. But those kind of things are part of the reason that I do like historical linguistics, in that it's a bit of a handshake across time, like holding a word from a dead language in your mouth is a little bit of a connection, a little bit of a link to people of the past. I also like you were saying as well, Richard, I like the fact that historical linguistics tries to move away from what the history of language is often taken to be. So we often almost do it anecdotally, like we follow the path of this funny word that comes from this funny word, and we try and fill in the blanks of why they might have gone from one to the other. Whereas historical linguistics as a discipline tries to do that in a much more scientific way. It tries to imagine the structures and rules or tendencies that mean that language inevitably changes in certain ways.
All right. Yes, I should say that if you come as a guest on English at Leeds Trinity, we're not necessarily going to make you reveal anything about your tattoos. Thank you very much to Ben and Will for being willing to share that. What we were going to go on to now, I think, is, as you say, Will, historical linguistics shouldn't be just about this or that interesting word, great as that is, but there's more that we can do, particularly more that we can do through digital resources. I think you were going to sort of talk us through some of the ways we could approach that.
Yeah, so most of my kind of research history has been based around using big collections of data known as corpora or a corpus, which is just this big body of data from a particular source of a particular language at any time. So you can find them for modern languages, but also historical languages. And when thinking about what we wanted to talk about today, I thought of a few examples of some pretty good corpus tools that are very accessible. So hopefully might be actually useful to anyone listening. So the first is the Google Books Ngram viewer, which is pretty straightforward and a bit magic, because it scrapes all of the words from Google Books. So Google Books supposedly includes a vast majority of all books published since 1800, and has therefore an incredibly dense amount of data. So, I mean, I'm sure that we can show these on the PowerPoint when it comes down to it, or on the slideshow.
We will do a slide version video of this on YouTube eventually. So then we can do some of these, because it produces this kind of visualization, doesn't it? Which is the most striking thing about it.
It has a really nice, so you can set the dates from which you want to look at, but you can also look at the entire span of the corpus. And it has a nice little line graph that shows you the rate of usage at any particular point across time. So you can see how a word that maybe was once popular is no longer popular, or vice versa. Or you can see weird little spikes and then try and work out why was it more popular then and why wasn't it more popular now.
So you could just put any word into that.
Any word, any string of words. In particular, the more words that you put in, the weirder the results probably will be, or the less results you'll probably find. But, for example, if you search the word bairn, which is a pretty Yorkshire term for a child, it's Yorkshire dialect. It's a Yorkshire dialect term for child, which, now you would probably find mostly in and around Yorkshire, or in Scotland as well, and Tyneside. But if you look at the Google Books Ngram viewer, moving back in time, you'll find that it used to be way, way more popular. So that's a really interesting lens through which we can look at a dialect like Yorkshire dialect in a modern context and go, why is Yorkshire dialect different? And when we look at the past of some of the words and forms that are specifically used in Yorkshire dialect, we can work out, oh, well, it's preserving some old forms that aren't preserved in other dialects. So to some extent, we can say that Yorkshire dialect is maybe a bit archaic, or at least ancestral. So I find that really interesting. And
another example of
any other examples of a good Yorkshire word, Ben, our resident Yorkshireman?
Well, we could do the ones that were in the Leeds dialect thing. Torfil for die.
Yeah.
Or clarty.
Clarty. I say clarty. Yeah.
Let's try clarty.
With a C, right?
With a C. Clarty.
Once again, it's much more popular back in time, clarty, than it is today. Although actually this one is maybe a steady rhythm. And when you start to compare these terms using corpora like this, you can start to find logical reasons why they might have different rates of use. So Ben, for example, is not necessarily a casual term. It's not necessarily dialectal back in time, not isolated to Yorkshire, and also not necessarily isolated to a particular register. So you could use it in a medical text as likely as you could use it in a letter. Whereas Clarty, I'm kind of imagining here, but I'm pretty sure that it's less well used in the past because it's always been a kind of relatively casual term for sticky or thick, which maybe just wasn't used outside of very particular registers in the past. So that's kind of an overview of how you can use Ngram Viewer to get like a big bird's eye view of the history of a word or a phrase over time. There are also other things you can do with it, like you can exclusively look at American English or exclusively look at different genres like fiction or non-fiction, newspapers, etc. Now, all those options are really good. I will say Ngram Viewer isn't really suitable for like proper research because the Google Books corpus is so big, it's very difficult to like make sure that it's not that there aren't duplicated books, that there aren't books that are in the wrong place that shouldn't be. It's quite difficult to be sure that your database is secure.
So it really it's a good kind of entry level sort of thing. You can get an interesting result, and if you're interested in the thing, is this word going up in use or down in use, you might get a visualization that kind of tells you that.
Yeah, it's a good maybe checking device to see whether something deserves more of a closer look.
Yeah, you're now going to tell us about the kind of another level at which we can actually just the Google Ngrams. Anybody can access that just by putting it into Google.
Just search Ngrams on Google, and it will be the first result, and then you get a nice little page. There's also guides and information that you can access that tells you how to use it.
It seems
there's more stuff you can do.
It seems very user friendly to me. So we're going on to something a bit more specialized.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about, more generally, I wanted to talk about a website called English-corpora.org, which is a really great collection of widely used online corpora that have all sorts of different specialisms. So there's loads on here for historical corpora as well as modern corpora, particular genre corpuses. Corpuses feels wrong in my mouth. But the one I wanted to talk about mainly is the British National Corpus, which was created by Oxford University. And so this one, while not as big as the Google Books corpus, which contains like 100 billion words or something, this does contain 100 million words of text from a wide range of genres. So that includes spoken language, fiction, magazines, newspapers, academic writing. And what's really great about the BNC is, firstly, you can compare spoken English to written English, which is really useful, not just for historical linguistics, but for any kind of linguistics that is interested in register. But also it's tagged. So where this differs from the Google Books corpus is that a machine or a person, I think probably a person in this case, because it was developed in the 90s, has gone through the corpus and tagged every word for whether it's a verb, a noun, a preposition, and there are other tag sets as well. But what's really useful about that is you can be less specific about what you're looking for. So, for example, if we wanted to look for a kind of construction called emphatic BVing, which is the emphatic usage of the verb to be and then a general verb. So
when it said BVing, that's
BVing. So
V stands for verb.
V stands for verb, and ing stands for the
So an example of a BVing construction would be
I am going to the shops rather than I'm going to the shops. So if someone was doubting whether you were going to the shops, you can say, no, I am going to the shops. So that's a particular construction that emerges in the early modern period. But it means that you can search, if you search in caps, it usually finds finds the relevant tagged word type. So you can use these kind of corpora to do more detailed, more generalized, perhaps, analysis of usage over time of words and phrases. And something that I've used this for before is to generate some good charts about usage over time. So something, Hannah, I think you might, well, I hope you will remember this, that we talked about in a class once was the hath-has distinction. So when hath started to be replaced by the s-ending version of the verb, we can see that over time with the BNC corpus. So we can see that not just in the BNC, but we can see it in EBO, which is also a corpus available through englishcorpora.org. And we can see that over time there is a reducing usage of the th ending and increasing usage of the s ending. So by using a corpus like this, you can search stuff, get a nice graph of what it looks like in general, but you can also download all of the data and have it in Excel or something like that for a closer examination, so that you can actually start picking apart the ways in which these things change.
Is the BNC accessible to anybody?
So all of these corpora through englishcorpora.org are accessible and usable by anybody. However, if you don't, you have to have an account. And also, if you don't have a license, you only get a limited number of searches per month, I think it is.
Per month. All right.
So those searches are pretty good. I would imagine for students, for example, if students are looking to look at these things, those will probably be sufficient, those limited searches per month. But also, I will say that if you wanted to get a license, you can buy them monthly, and they're very affordable. I think it's like, less than £5 for a month. For a month.
If you're planning
if you were planning, or if you have a dissertation coming up, or something like that, where you want to use one of these corpora to their fullest, then you can do it like that, and it's all accessible through the browser. Again, there's lots of guidance and help through that, which is really, really useful. Right.
So, in theory, all the things you could do on Google Ngrams, you can also do on BNC, but with a lot more functionality.
Definitely functionality, yeah. So you can do anything that you would do on the Ngram viewer on any of these corpora, and also you can do a whole bunch more stuff.
So once you've started off with Google Ngrams, then you could sort of work on BNC, and then you've got a third one you're going to talk about, which is one that you yourself have actually helped to build, I think.
Yes. So on the englishcorpora.org site, you can see that there's a corpus called Early English Books Online. And that was one of the source corpora for a corpus that I helped to develop during my PhD, which is called the EMMA corpus, which stands for Early Modern Multiloquent Authors, which is kind of a
multiloquent.
Really trying to get Emma out of that, I think, for it. It was definitely a backronym. But so,
what does multiloquent mean?
Multiloquent means prolific, essentially. So
do a lot of speaking,
do a lot of writing, do a lot of publishing. So the whole point of the Emma corpus was to take something like the Early English Books corpus, which has loads of books from loads of different authors from all across the early modern period, which is, we're talking 17th century. So the goal was to take a big corpus like that and try and maintain the size, but try and focus on 50 individual authors. So those 50 individual authors all operated across the 17th century and were all incredibly prolific. They had to have produced at least 500,000 words per year of their career. So they are very prolific.
Does it include Shakespeare?
Shakespeare's a little before our time period, unfortunately. Right. So we start in 1616. Dryden is the biggest author probably from our corpus. John Dryden, who was the first poet laureate of
yes,
England.
I think that's what they usually say.
That's what they usually say.
I'm not sure how well defined poet laureate
I think
was.
it wasn't really a thing. I think after Dryden, it became a defined thing.
Yeah.
Yes, he founded.
He usually is at the top of the list. You're right.
So, yeah, we wanted to focus on 50 specific authors. And we wanted to do this because we didn't just want to know about the content of their language use or the content of language use in general over this period. We wanted to be able to look at these people and firstly see whether their position in society or their job had anything to do with how they used language, but also to see whether the language that they used within their lifetime changed over the course of their lives. So we wanted to see the extent to which adults can change their grammars, change their mental grammars, the grammar that's in their mind. So to do this, we got 50 authors, all of whom wrote lots, all of whom are variously part of 5 generations that run through the 17th century. And we constructed this corpus based on every published text that each of these authors has. So these include everything from plays and theological texts to some published collections of letters, which are really useful. There's also another corpus called the Early Modern Correspondence corpus, which is exclusively letters, which is really useful. So why did we want to do this, and why? So it has 90 million words of data. So it's pretty big, especially for historical corpus, especially for one that focuses on these people. And part of it focusing on these people was intended to facilitate incorporating huge amounts of metadata. So for every text, we've got the publication date, we've got where the author was living when they wrote it. It's mainly he's, unfortunately. There are 2 women in the corpus, but it's mainly he's, which is a big flaw with historical sociolinguistics. So it's got loads of metadata about whether they were in prison, whether they were royalist or parliamentarian or somewhere in the middle, what their religion was, etc., etc. And so all of this detail is really useful for informing our argument for why certain things happen with language.
Can you give us an example of something that you've discovered through having this amazing database of 90 million words?
Yeah.
Then what can you get out of it?
So the main way that we were using it was to look for syntactic variation. So because syntactic variation is a bit rarer, you obviously need a lot of data to be able to get anything reliable.
So this is taking us back to what Hannah was saying.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. So part of the syntax that we were looking at were things like the evolution of the grow-get copula. So this is a thing that happened in the early modern period, in the 17th century specifically, where the word grow, so I grow taller, started to be used for more copularized, stative terms. So I grow sad, or I grow happy, or I get happy, I get sad. So it's not get moves from being possessive, right, to being a kind of stative evolution. So
it'd be like the difference between I get money and I get rich.
Exactly. Yeah. So the evolution of these get-grow copulas is quite difficult to detect. So it needs you to have a lot of very well-sourced data that you can go through and annotate. And that means once you've gone through all of the data doing that, it means that you can look back at your data and go, okay, how many grow copulas there were versus grow non-copulas? And you can start to measure, okay, how many grow copulas does Afra Ben use versus how many grow copulas does Richard Baxter use? These are 2 of the authors from our corpus. And by comparing these things and comparing them over time, you start to build a picture of how these speakers changed their language over their lifetime and where these innovations, like the grow copula, where they might have occurred in society. So if we have a very, very well-off Christian Londoner who never uses grow copula, and then all of our Midlands traders all start using the grow copula, well, we can be pretty sure that the innovation started in one place and then gradually spread throughout the community. So it's really useful for stuff like that.
Can I just clarify the grow copular construction?
Yeah.
So we're talking about the verbs grow or get, and then when you say copula, that means the thing that means grow is being used to link to an adjective.
Yes, pretty much. It means that it's part of the kind of stative paradigm of verbs like the verb to be.
Yes. So what follows? We're talking about when what follows grow or get is not an object, but is a modifier. Is a modifier, an adjective, something that you become.
I mean,
something that you acquire.
the best way that I've used to think about it is that the word grow starts to be used a little bit like the word become.
Yes.
So that would be a stative.
Yeah, right. I get that.
So the grow get copula is one potentially interesting one, and another one that was actually my pet project was icklefts, which are a particular kind of sentence. So in this, we're not looking for a particular word; we're looking for a particular structure.
Yes,
and we can do that even without tagging, just by trying to work out what can possibly go in different places in a sentence.
And so, can you give us an example of ickleft?
So an ickleft is a sentence like, "It is Richard that produces this podcast,"
right?
And not Ben. Sorry, Ben.
That's right.
I think actually Ben is doing more production.
I can't do it without Ben. I can tell you that. Right, that's an ickleft. And what did you find out about the icklefts?
So what we found is that icklefts initially started only being able to have proper names or the definite article in the focused bit. So it is X that Y. The X bit could only be proper names or definite noun phrases initially. And that's been the case all the way since Old English.
Right.
Now, what happens in the early modern period and what happens during the lifetime of a lot of our authors is that people start to branch out. So you start to see initially more indefinite noun phrases, then some demonstrative noun phrases, and then eventually you start to move out of the noun phrase world altogether and you start to get prepositional phrases. So sentences like, "It is by faith that we shall win this war." You also start to see in a kind of more sociolinguistic sense, you start to see these phrases being used as rhetorical devices. So they're used argumentatively rather than just as an easy way of creating focus or creating a relative clause. So we start to see these kind of quite subtle, but definitely influential changes to this construction. And what's most interesting is we start to see them in particular people and in not in others. So people who were public speakers, so preachers, politicians, poets, playwrights, these kinds of people are the ones who use the rhetorical version of the construction, and other people like medics, theologians, etc., they don't, largely, or at least to a lesser degree. So you not only can you start to track the progress of a changing construction, but you can see where it's featured within a community.
Right.
And as the point to finish about Emma, I think that this is like a really important step towards getting over what Lyubov calls the problem of bad data. Lyubov has a famous quote where he says that historical linguistics is the art of the best use of bad data. And he uses that to imply that things like the richness of synchronic sociolinguistics can't be done about the past. And I think that machines like the Emma Corpus help us get to a point where it's slightly questionable. Maybe we can do sociolinguistics of the past. And I think that's really, really useful.
So I could say with an ickleft construction, it was Lyubov who inspired you to create Emma.
There you go. Emma is also freely available. You need to register for it via the email address on its website. So if you just Google Emma Corpus, it should be the first one that comes up.
So that one you have to kind of, you won't be turned down, but you have to just do something
pretty
to be
much.
able to access it.
I mean, I think it's mainly to stop like bots from just
so
trashing the website.
Yeah. we'll put all this information, make it available when we, what's the word for a podcast coming out?
Publish.
When we publish. People say drop these days, don't they?
Drop the episode, yeah.
I think you should incorporate that into your idiolects. Just
okay, yeah, you'll find
drop the EP.
When somebody does incorporate add me into Emma, then you'll find that
every time you upload a lecture recording, you can say just drop the lecture.
Just drop the lecture. Yeah. I'll just drop this. Yes, I'm not like, because to me it's an up thing, not a downward thing. So it's a problem there. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for talking us through those resources, which I think now we're all kind of quite keen to have a go at if we haven't already. And I hope that we will, in future episodes, actually kind of be able to report back on things we may have found out from using these a bit, so that we can do that. I was going to ask everyone, actually, has what Will has said given you a particular idea for a word you want, or a construction that you want to research?
I'd like to look more into that, like, hath idea that hath has. I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Like, when did it really start changing over from that hath being used constantly to has?
I heard it was a north to south.
It's Northumbrian, yeah. So it definitely was used here in Yorkshire well before it was used in somewhere like London. But I think maybe what's as interesting with that one is not only looking at when it happened, but looking at who started using it first, who was like bringing that variant down to London, or that variant to the south, and therefore bringing it into popularity. And that's something that our corpora can do.
Hannah, was there anything that you thought you would like to research?
Yeah, I also just wanted to say first that I've met a lot of people who aren't studying English but are still interested in why we say certain things and where certain words came from. So I think that it's actually quite a broad thing. I think anybody should be able to access things like this, because I do honestly meet a lot of people who kind of wonder about language, whether they even realise it or not. So I think it's a really great resource. I'm quite interested in looking at the word together, because it's a word we use a lot, and when I look at it, I can kind of split it into two.
Split it into two? What? Two and together?
Two, like, gather sounds sort of like gather, to gather, which kind of has the same meaning as the word. So I think that's how it kind of came about. But I don't know. I want to know more about the word, to be honest. It's an everyday word that we use. We use it a lot, but we also probably would have used it quite a lot in the past as well. So it's quite a relevant word.
I mean, Hannah, that sounds like you've got a hypothesis to test, which is that it comes from two, which is a perfectly reasonable one, I'd say. And yeah, that things like that are definitely the kind of thing that you can look into, the history of these words. And also, to anyone who isn't a linguist or an English-oriented person who happens to be listening to this, I'd also highly recommend just using Wiktionary. It's like a Wikipedia, but for a dictionary, and it has really good etymological details, as I'm sure the OED definitely does.
Yes.
Well. Not to
going to come in there.
I don't
like to hear anything we mentioned above there before the OED, and so I'm just going to come in with a bit of OED stuff here, because of course the OED is also a fantastic resource for history of language, isn't it? I'm not so familiar with it as a corpus, but as for individual words, I thought it'd be quite interesting just to look up the word corpus in the OED, just to find out where that's coming from. And it has indeed been around in English as a word meaning body since about the mid-15th century, but it only starts to be used in the sense we've been talking about it, the body of written or spoken material upon which a linguistic analysis is based. The earliest use of it there is 1956. So that reflects the how much data analysis has become part of linguistics on a much bigger scale.
I mean, but back in the 50s, those corpora were all on note cards. They were physical.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, I don't even know how that would have worked.
Yeah.
But the progress has been massively quick in this field, and the kind of evolution of what we would call the digital humanities, this incorporation of digital techniques into traditional humanities study, I think has the potential to really revolutionize the field. Well, it has already revolutionized the field, but I think we can go even further. And of course, things like corpora are essential for making machines like any kind of generative AI that anyone's used, or any voice assistants, any kind of computer knowledge of language is generated almost exclusively from corpora, which is, very powerful.
So in 100 years' time, somebody will be able to look back and say whether corpora or corpuses has become the plural form for a corpus. But at the moment, they're fighting it out, I think.
That's my historical-linguistic snobbery. It's a Latin word.
Yes. I mean, that's interesting. I was thinking, it goes back to the OED thing. It's a word that's just come from Latin. Someone has just taken the Latin word and started using it in English. Even though when I was looking at it, I was thinking, isn't it almost exactly the same word as corpse? But the history of corpse is completely different. I mean, that's a word that's been around much longer, and really, before it was corpse, it was more like course. And then this P, because people know it comes from the Latin word corpus, has gradually crept back in. So there's the route into English that is through French and through this sort of longer history. And then there's the route into English, which is just a scholar somewhere says, I'm just going to have it straight from Latin, and because it does what I want.
It's surprising how often that happens.
Yeah.
How often we have an inherited word and then a borrowed word from the same source, which is always interesting.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Will, for talking us through those and sharing your expertise. And that's really inspired us all, I think, to do historical linguistics with more data. Than
please. Just
the odd anecdotal knowledge of a word, although we will still do that as well.
No, that's fine too.
That's certainly what everyone is interested in, as Hannah was saying. We're going to finish, I think, with a few different historic goodbyes. I'm going to say thank you to each of you if you'd like to say your goodbye. So, thank you, Ben.
I shall see you anon.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Goodbye.
And thank you, Will.
Wesathola.
Goodbye. Fare you well. Well, I'm sorry there was a bit of sound distortion in the last minute or so there, and also my pronunciation of the word those took a rather strange turn, and I ended up saying those. So it's not how I would normally pronounce the word, but who knows? In 100 years' time, perhaps that will be how everybody will be pronouncing it. That's language change for you. Now, I'm very pleased that actually Will is just come back into the studio, and I'm just going to ask him finally, is there anything further, Will, that you would like to say, just to encourage us further to get interested in and find out more about corpuses and have a go at using them?
Yeah, so we had a lovely meandering conversation, but I just wanted to make sure that I got some headlines out there, the kind of three main factors that I think are really important about corpus linguistics in general. First, and probably most important, I've been beating myself up for not mentioning this, is that corpora let us see instances of real language usage in context, and that can allow us to see things that we may have been ignorant of before, or things that may confound any analysis. Also, corpora are representative. So even if you're taking small anecdotal elements, it's important that we make these analyses on a representative sample that can be very specific or it can be quite general, but we want to make sure that we're analyzing something real. And finally, things that add to our actual analysis is that corpora are really versatile. You can use them for qualitative analysis, but also if you've got a large enough sample, you can look at quantitative or statistical analyses, which can really add richness to our ideas about language and how it changes. Finally, whilst it may seem like they are, arcane and a little bit confusing, corpora are actually very accessible. Anyone can find one online. Anyone can access them, and with just a little bit of training and work, and thinking about it, you can also look into the past and find something incredibly interesting about the languages that we used to speak. But that's about it.
Thank you. I like what you did there. We've got real, representative, and richness. So that's easy for everyone to remember. And most important of all, accessible. 3 R's and 1 A. And in order to facilitate that a bit more, there will be a version of this podcast on YouTube, and there we will have a whole series of images of what these corpora look like when you access them, and so just so you can get started with them. So thank you very much, Will.
Thank you, Richard.
And thank you everyone for listening, and thank you also, as we always say, to Steve Oxon and Fesleyan Studios for our music, which is called Rio After Dark.